All right, rather than use my 10 minutes to go over all of my testimony, I'd like to concentrate on the things we did in the design to minimize the impact of a 30-meter telescope on Mauna Kea. I'm the leader of the design team, the team responsible for the design and the construction, and most of the design choices in the end are approved by me. It was clear very early on in designing TMT for Mauna Kea that this was a sensitive location and that visual impacts were very important, and it was my goal, aside from meeting all the technical requirements of the design, to produce a design which was the smallest possible observatory that was a 30-meter telescope that met our scientific goals. The design technology for the 30-meter telescope starts with the Keck telescopes. It's a segmented mirror telescope. The design philosophy for the 30-meter telescope starts with the Keck telescopes on Mauna Kea, which are segmented mirror telescopes. Those mirrors are 10 meters in diameter. We're using the same technology. If we followed the same technical approach as Keck, we would have a 30-meter diameter mirror, but the focal point, the point above the mirror at which the light is focused, would be 1.75 times as far away from the mirror as the diameter of the mirror. That's called an f1.75 design. That's what the design was for Keck. If we followed the Keck design and then designed a dome, an enclosure to go around the telescope, the illustration up there, which is exhibit C2, C3, shows that our dome would be 256 feet high and 361 feet wide. We thought that was a very large design, and so we set out to reduce the size of the telescope and to reduce the size of the dome. And so the engineers studied how to shorten the telescope and decided to make an F1 design. That means the focal point is only as far away from the mirror as the size of the mirror. That's a much shorter telescope, but it's more complicated to polish the mirrors, it's more technically risky, it's more expensive to make such a mirror. Nevertheless, we adopted an F1 design. That shortened the telescope to a little bit less than 60% the length of the telescope if we had followed the Keck design. And so with that, you can see from the illustration on the left of exhibit C3 how much smaller the telescope in its dome is with the F1 design. That's a major reduction in the size of the observatory. Of course, it doesn't help to reduce the size of the telescope if you don't reduce the size of the dome. The function of the dome around a telescope is to protect the telescope during the day from weather, and at night to protect it from wind. The goal of the telescope is to get a very sharp image. Wind can cause the telescope to move. It can disturb the telescope, cause it to jitter, and that would blur the image. And so one of the functions of a dome is to create a wind shadow for the telescope. And that means that the telescope can't stick up out of the opening or be close to the opening. It has to be deep inside. That means the dome is large. What I set out to do with the team was to make the dome as small as possible. And so I asked the team to design the smallest dome shrunk around the telescope and still have a wind shadow. And the way we did that, you can see on the left around in the exhibit C3, some rectangular flaps around the opening in the dome. Those are like the flaps on the back of the wing of an airplane. And so we shrunk the dome down to as small as possible size and added these flaps which can be moved to create a wind shadow, and that significantly reduced the size of the dome. And I furthermore required that there only be a minimum clearance between the telescope and the dome so that we could do maintenance, and that's a 20-inch separation. If you look at other telescopes in the world, the dome has much more space between it and the telescope. And there are no other telescopes that I know of in the world that have flaps to create a wind shadow and allow you to shrink the dome. So we took great pains to reduce the size of the telescope, to reduce the size of the dome, which means you reduce the footprint also of the observatory and use less land and interfere less with the other uses of the land around the observatory. This was a significant improvement in the design of TMT, accomplishing all of our science goals and reducing the impact on the mountain. Figure C23 shows a comparison of that design of TMT compared to other large telescopes. On the left are the Subaru telescope and the Gemini telescope. Those have only 8-meter mirrors, not 30-meter mirrors, 3.5 times smaller mirrors than ours, and yet you can see, for example, with Gemini, that our dome is only 20% higher, 151 feet versus 180 feet. To the right of the 30-meter telescope is the giant Magellan telescope. Its mirror is only 24 meters in diameter, significantly smaller than our 30 meters, and yet its dome is 200 feet, taller than ours. And on the right is the European extremely large telescope, which is a 39-meter mirror, and you can see that it's a very large dome. So this demonstrates to you the lengths to which we went to reduce the size of the observatory, to reduce its impacts, and to reduce the visual impact of the TMT observatory. There are many other places in the design where we took similar approaches. We aligned the accessway road, working with Kahukumana, to minimize the amount of road disturbance on the ground. There was an existing Jeep trail. We laid a 30-foot pole down at 27 locations on that road and made sure that we could align the road to only use the part of the trail that was disturbed already and minimize the additional width. And we showed that to Kahukumana to show them that we were minimizing the disturbance on the mountain. And there are other examples that I could give. So that's what I really wanted to cover in my summary of the testimony. It was the extent to which, in carrying out the design, we tried to mitigate the impacts of TMT on Mauna Kea. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Sanders. Mr. Sanderson.